Hi there, I'm Matt Donnelly, and I have an admission to make based on last week. So last Sunday, before the games even started, I stubbed my pinky toe. It was one of those fix auto type moments that, you know, the ones where you have to control your pain not to wake everyone in the family up. This is how I felt promoting Javonte Williams. The only difference is I will totally forget that I stubbed my toe in a couple weeks, but unfortunately I'll never forget putting trust in the Broncos running back. Regarding injuries and buys, there's not much going on here in week number 9 that leave fantasy managers with that stub toe type feeling. This week, Najee Harris, Jordan Mason, Isaac Guerrero, Jalen Warren, those are the guys that are going to be sitting next to Javonte Williams on my bench. Now let's talk about those guys you're starting, those week 9 starts, those fantasy football booms, and let's start with Mr. Big Time himself, Joe Mixon. Mixon is that guy that you want as a volume play each and every week. No Nico Collins, no Stephon Diggs, no problem. This means that Mixon, he could flirt with 40 touches in this week's contest. Last week, Mixon carried the ball 25 times for 102 yards and added 32 additional yards, catching 4 of 6 targets. Mixon is averaging 22 fantasy points per game in the 5 games that he has played this season, and he's hit the over on 21 fantasy points in 4 of those 5 contests. Not even Derrick Henry is averaging more fantasy production on a per game basis than Mixon has. Let's dig more deeply into those numbers. In the 4 games that he has played in full, the Texans back has produced 742 yards with no less than 125 in any of those games, while averaging 26.25 touches per game, finishing as a top 5 fantasy back in each one of those contests. The next running back I'm firing up this week, how about Devin Achane of the Miami Dolphins as they take on the Buffalo Bills? With Tua Tagovailoa's return came the return of both Devin Achane and Raheem Mostert. We knew Miami would want to protect Tagovailoa there at any cost in his return to action, and they did so with some short passes. He also protected himself with a feet first slide that the Dolphins faithful certainly appreciated. Achane should be considered a top 5 fantasy back. I'm not talking about 3, 4, or 5. I'm talking about the number 1 fantasy running back as long as Tua Tagovailoa remains healthy. In games that Tagovailoa has played, Achane is averaging 26.4 fantasy points per game. That is actually good enough to be the RB1 on a per game basis. I mean, it's a small sample, but it is a sample nonetheless. With 97 yards on 10 attempts and 6 receptions for 50 yards and a touchdown, Achane surpassed 23 fantasy points for the 3rd time this season. Now, fun fact, if you remove Achane's fantasy production as a runner, his 65.4 fantasy points are still more than Jalen Waddle's 57.4 fantasy points this season. Why is that? Well, in 3 games with Tagovailoa, Achane has seen a target share of 19%, 18%, and 21%. That has worked out to 20 receptions on 22 targets for 195 yards and a pair of touchdowns. No team in the NFL is allowing more receptions than the 51 that the Buffalo Bills are allowing. They're also allowing a league high 434 receiving yards to running backs this season. Now, the 3rd running back that I feel good about this week, how about Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans versus the New England Patriots? Speaking of great matchups for running backs, Pollard welcomes the New England Patriots to Tennessee this week. New England, they are allowing 26.89 fantasy points per game during the season. That is the 5th highest number. However, over the last 4 weeks, only the Carolina Panthers have allowed more than the 32.5 fantasy points per contest than the Patriots have conceded. New England has allowed a league high 651 rush yards and 6 scores in that 4-week period. To his credit, Pollard, he has produced more than 14 fantasy points in all but 2 contests so far this season, including 14.7 in a difficult matchup against the Lions last week. Look no further if you're looking for a workhorse back that nobody is talking about. Pollard is in the top 15 in rushing yards, carries, weighted opportunities. He's also seen the 7th most targets amongst the running back position and averages 19.3 touches per game. That is the 9th most, which, considering what we've seen from game scripts lately, is quite impressive. In a week in which the game script projects to be positive, Pollard and that volume should have him in contention for a top 12 fantasy week at his position. Now, how about those week 9 sits, those fantasy football busts? We're going to start with J.K. Dobbins of the Los Angeles Chargers as they take on the Cleveland Browns. Well, J.K. Dobbins has been a solid addition to fantasy lineups, as his 535 rushing yards suggest. Those rushing yards, they could be hard to come by this week. Over the last 3 weeks, Cleveland has allowed the 9th fewest rushing yards per game and surrendered the 5th fewest fantasy points to the position, allowing just 17.5 over the last 4 weeks. Even the king himself, Derrick Henry, only tallied 73 rushing yards last week against the Browns. With Jameis Winston under center, Cleveland's offense, it looks a little bit different. If the Chargers are going to compete this week, they're going to need to throw the ball, which is going to affect Dobbins' bottom line. From the strange but true files, how about the Chargers offense? We knew that they were going to run the ball. There was no question about that. But we didn't expect that Dobbins would not be involved in goal-to-goal situations from the 1 yard line. The fact is, the Chargers have the highest goal-to-goal passing percentage in the entire National Football League. Another sit this week is Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots as they take on the Tennessee Titans. Now, I was wrong when I said to sit Ramondre Stevenson last week. Or was I? Hey, the fantasy numbers say one thing, and I guess that's what really matters. But Stevenson, although he finished week 8 with 22 fantasy points, I have a good feeling about my process here because the Patriots running back, he averages 2.4 yards per carry on his 20 attempts. Now that I've said all that, Stevenson, he is a sit once again this week. Expect similar type of production minus the touchdowns, even though Tennessee is allowing the most rushing touchdowns to running backs this season. So I could possibly be eating my words once more. But hey, lightning never strikes twice in the same place, does it? Now, for my own peace of mind, I don't see that happening. Tennessee has allowed opposing backs just 16.93 fantasy points per game over the last 4 weeks, and I'm not sold that Stevenson is back, especially if Drake May remains in the NFL's concussion protocol. This Patriots offense, it did struggle with Jacoby Brissett, and Ramondre Stevenson wasn't very good when Brissett was under control of this offense. And the third sit of the week I've got going for me, how about Rashad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as they take on the Kansas City Chiefs? I absolutely refuse to start a back when they face the Kansas City Chiefs. Over the last 4 weeks, the Chiefs have allowed just 12.9 fantasy points against, the lowest total in the league by a full 3 fantasy points. On the season, they are allowing just 13.61 fantasy points. That is 3.76 fewer than the next closest team. Now, while I would assume that this is going to be a negative game script and it's going to favor Rashad White here, especially in PPR type formats, looking at this Buccaneers backfield and their opportunities, how they kind of went about it last week, it's going to give me a little bit of hesitation. In that Week 8 contest, Bucky Irving bested White 16 opportunities to 12 opportunities. That's when we calculate the carries and the targets. While Sean Tucker, he also received 3 such opportunities himself. That gives Rashad White a 39% opportunity share. And that's not something I absolutely could put my faith in when I'm talking about my fantasy football season. Tampa's backfield has been anything but predictable. And for that reason, I am out. Now, where I am fully in is with RotoBaller.com for all the latest news and analysis. And head over to RotoBaller's Discord channel where you'll find me 24/7 answering your weekly questions. See you next time.